Hey folks, this is the second in a series of videos that I'm recording, trying to, at least do something to further your education while you're all sitting at home. And you have to read the Hunger Games, the reading schedule doesn't change, so I thought I would do, a little talk on themes and illusions and some of the more complicated aspects of the story to help you, because I can't be there to help you do the analysis in your home. So this is about as good as it gets. Apologies in advance if my dogs come storming down the hall barking at a squirrel or anything crazy happens, but I'm going to give it the best shot I can here, and this is sort of a new technology to me. The Hunger Games. Let's start. I've written some stuff on the wall here, and I hope you can read it. If you can't, I'll try and go through it, but it'll give you a sense of where I'm headed. So let's talk first about the setting of the Hunger Games, because the Hunger Games is set in this sort of dystopian future world. It definitely belongs to a dystopian genre that sort of bloomed, in the 90s and 2000s. With books like The Hunger Games and Divergent and, like all of that. But the dystopian world here is a world called Panem. Fun fact, Panem is Latin for bread, and it's called The Hunger Games. So clearly something's going on there, and we'll talk about that later. But Panem is this world where there's a capital city and a bunch of outlying districts, and the districts are poor, and the capital city is sort of decadent, and, so it's set in the North America, in what used to be the United States. Some event, which is not really clear, destroyed the United States, and Panem built itself up. There's been a civil war, and there's all this backstory that you slowly get fed to you over the course of the book. It doesn't info dump on you in a traditional exposition, which is nice. But let's talk about this dystopian world a little bit and how it echoes the USA, and how I think that's intentional on the part of Collins, the author. So it's sort of a hybrid, this world of the United States and Rome, the traditional Rome. It's a capital in districts. Rome was a capital with a bunch of provinces. And so, there's a definite Rome aspect to that. The story takes place in District 12, which is one of the poorest districts, if not the poorest district. It's a coal mining district. It's very clearly West Virginia or Pennsylvania coal country or someplace like that. The capital, I don't think it's supposed to represent D.C. Obviously, it represents Rome in some sort of a, illusion kind of a way. But it's much more akin to Hollywood or New York City or Los Angeles, or something like that. So it's some hybrid of sort of Hollywood, L.A., and Rome, and New York City going on there. There was a civil war in the past, and the Hunger Games are sort of a reparation from the losing side to the winning side in that civil war. And in the civil war, the agricultural side lost and the industrial side won. And so, that's very much echoing the United States Civil War. The South was a more agrarian or agricultural society, and the North was more heavily mechanized, and ultimately they were victorious. In this dystopian world, the losing side is still bitter, and, in their souls, sort of the war is still not over, and they're holding on to that, and you can see that. Now, obviously, the wars didn't have anything like the same cause, and there's nothing. I mean, the capital is the one that partakes in slavery with avoxes and things like that. So it's not a one-to-one, connection here. But there are these sort of echoes that Collins is using to make the world feel familiar, and I think she does a pretty good job with that. So that's sort of the setting. Your narrator is Katniss Everdeen. It's a first-person point of view. It's present tense, so everything's happening like in the now, I think, which is interesting. She's reliable, but when she's reliable, there's a lot she doesn't know, so you're getting, information that's filtered through her understanding of the world. And I don't want to say she's biased. She's not feeding you things intentionally wrong or anything like that, but she only knows what she knows about District 12, and her viewpoint is definitely pro District 12 and against the capital. And so you're filtered through this throughout the entire story, and that's part of what draws you into it. So you should be aware of the narrator and the narrator's point of view. I guess that's enough, of sort of the initial complexities, and then we can talk about some of the themes and things that are going on. I'm not going to get into the plot. I don't want to give you spoilers or anything like that. So, themes. When we go down the list here of themes, we're going to start... Oops, I'm coming off the side of the screen. We're going to start with class struggle. I think that's the most obvious theme. There's this juxtaposition or an intentional contrast between the districts, especially District 12, where Katniss starts out in the capital. And so chapters 1 to 3 sets you up in a way that you see what life is like in the districts. And it is terrible. These people are starving. They don't have enough of anything. Their life is dangerous. It's controlled by the government. And then you go to the government in chapter 4 through 9 and you see the excesses and gluttony and all the things they have. And so it's really a juxtaposition of hunger versus gluttony. And the people who have far too much food are forcing the people who have no food to fight for their enjoyment in an arena. I mean, like, it's some pretty harsh stuff, some pretty harsh dystopian stuff. But ultimately, the theme is about class struggle. That there are people who have a lot and people who have almost nothing in the world. And Collins is suggesting that the people who have a lot, are not understanding. There's a fundamental disconnect, especially when you get to the chapters in the capital, between those people and the people who have nothing, and they almost can't even understand each other. And so she is definitely making some sort of a statement about class struggle and the different classes and that kind of thing. So then we can move on. Corruption and decadence. This is definitely a connection to Rome. The reigning theory essentially is that one of the leading factors in the destruction of the Roman Empire was decadence, that the people lost sight of their values and became selfish and gluttonous and wasteful. And a lot of talk now is about maybe how America's going down the same road. And so politically, sci-fi is always political, and you can't get away from politics and sci-fi. And so when I talk about these things, I'm talking about sort of what Collins is hinting at in The Hunger Games, not Mr. Howard's view on politics, which is straight out, especially in an election year. You're not going to hear any of that from me. But Collins seems to be suggesting that, at least in Pan Am, the capital's big problem is this idea of corruption or decadence or selfishness. The people in the capital really only care about themselves. They care about entertainment. They care about fancy foods and clothing. And, they've distanced themselves entirely from the poor people, the people that live in the districts. They've dehumanized those people, so much so that they'll watch them fight and die on a TV show and root for them and maybe feel sad in the moment, but not really. They're dehumanized. And so the idea I think that Collins is trying to get across, and you can see this in a number of episodes, is how when you have too much, you lose the value of everything. Nothing matters. Nothing has value except your own entertainment, whatever you can enjoy for a few minutes to distract you. And that's the life in the capital. And Collins seems to be suggesting that kind of decadence comes with too many material things. And what that means for her primarily American audience, that's up to you to decide. But she's definitely asking us to consider some of these elements as the story goes on. Selfishness and sacrifice. The question I wrote on the board is, what is Katniss willing to sacrifice for? The interesting and sort of ironic thing about this is that Katniss thinks of herself as a selfish person. She doesn't want to meet other people. She doesn't want to get to know the other tributes because she knows she's going to have to kill them in the Hunger Games. She doesn't like sharing with other people. But the irony is that almost every action she takes is selfless. But she's selfless for very specific reasons. So she's willing to sacrifice herself for her sister. She's willing to, give up her innocence and grow up and become the breadwinner for her family. She's willing to do things for individual people. Katniss is not interested in becoming a martyr to fight the government. She's interested in staying alive so that she can continue to sacrifice and help to save the people she cares about. And so, there's this very interesting idea about how selflessness and sacrifice is carried out, at least in the Hunger Games, for individual reasons. And that Katniss doesn't really think about it that way. So that's something that I think you can follow through and track over the course of the story. What is Collins trying to say about those sacrifices that we make and why we make them and what makes something worth sacrificing for? or giving up yourself or your own desires. And obviously Katniss's sacrifice is juxtaposed against the selfishness of all the people in the capital, chief among whom, would be Snow when you get down to it. If you read the whole series, you can see how that juxtaposition of Katniss and President Snow, they're sort of opposites of each other in a lot of ways, and I think that's interesting. So then we can talk about control and rebellion. This is a totalitarian government in Panem. They control everything about everyone. The Hunger Games are a means of control. They're a way to control the masses. And obviously, almost everything they want to be under their control, but it's not. It very clearly is not. And you get all of these symbols, whether it's a mockingjay. They talk about the mockingjay. It's this bird, that's a hybrid bird that was originally designed to control the population, but sort of got out of control and then was used by the population against the government. But the people are the same way. The government's trying to control everything, and it turns out that things can't be controlled. The Hunger Games themselves are a method of control, and within that method of control, I don't want to spoil it for you, but Katniss ends up, finding ways to rebel, finding sort of the chaos in the system. And I think that's another thing that Collins is trying to say, you can't control everything. And lots of times governments, especially totalitarian governments, they want to control everything. So you can look at that. Love and family, that sort of ties in with the selflessness and sacrifice. There's a lot of relationships in this story, and they're all sort of triangulated on Katniss. There's obviously a love triangle. Katniss is with this guy called Gale. It's not really like they're in a relationship, but they're kind of in a relationship. And there's this guy Peeta, and, he wants to be in it, and, is it? And then, Katniss has her sister, who's really the one she cares about. And then she meets this girl, Rue, and so, Katniss is never willing to sacrifice anything unless she loves the person she's sacrificing for, and then she's willing to sacrifice everything. And so the question is, how does love and family tie into the other themes? Katniss has a very structured way of understanding the world, in which, family is sort of the most important thing. And it's far more important than loyalties to government or to rebellion or to other people. What is Collins saying about this and about the relationships that we form in our real family and our found family, the family that comes into our life and that we adopt. So I think that's a question that you want to look at and think about as you go through. And then finally, our good old friend Loss of Innocence comes back. Hey, it's a coming of age story. We've got a young girl. She's already lost her father. She's gone through some pretty tough things. But now she's put in an arena where she has to kill people and see people killed. And that's not something that she's done before. And so, of course, she's going to go through that trajectory of loss of innocence. And it's going to be sad and traumatic for us as readers. And she's going to grow through it. And theoretically, by watching her grow, we grow as human beings. And that's the whole purpose of literature. So there's some themes for you to think about as you read and to annotate for and to note. Moving on from that, I said this, that sci-fi is almost always political in some way because the author can write it in an alternate reality